Family Matters is the only program hosted by a real sitting judge. And today we're breaking even more barriers. We'll hear from an outspoken retired family court judge who will unleash his most forthright insights into the justice system on this episode of View from the Bench.
Brought to you by AdviceScene.com. Free legal answers from verified lawyers.
Want to know what a judge really thinks? He probably won't be able to tell you until he retires. Today's guest will tell us why he left his job as a family court judge after 22 years to pursue what he believes is a much healthier and effective way to help parents resolve conflicts. I'm thrilled and delighted to welcome our very special guest, retired Judge Michael Porter. Is it okay if I call you Michael?
Absolutely, Harvey. Can I call you Harvey?
Absolutely. I want to thank you so much for being here. You are our first judicial guest of the season.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure because I've been very, very supportive of you and your book from the time it very first came out. It's just really what was needed, and we've talked about that before many times. So.
Well, I really appreciate it. I have to say that I keep thinking to myself, would you have done this if you were still a sitting judge? Would you have come on TV and talked about the system?
Oh, I don't know whether I'd have survived as a sitting judge. You've been very brave to have stepped out and stepped off the bench and to have done all the writing that you've done and the presentations that you made and talk to people about what it really is all about.
But I think the public has such a hunger and a need for valuable, reliable, accessible information.
Absolutely.
About the law and the justice system. And you know, family law impacts more people than any other area.
Oh, absolutely, because people take it home every day, don't they?
But now that you're retired, are there things you can say that you wouldn't have said when you were a judge publicly?
Well, I suppose so. I mean, you're working in a paradigm in the court system. It's a bureaucracy. It's got its hierarchy. There are established norms that you have to fit into. If you shake the tree too much, you sort of likely to get pushed out the side a little bit. And
well, so, did you do that as a judge?
Oh, I used to shake the tree probably.
Over what?
Much.
What issues irked you?
Well,
you retired in what year?
I retired in 1997.
Okay.
14 years
so
ago.
What tree were you shaking in the 90s?
Well, a whole bunch of trees, really. I mean, in the different, I sat both in the family court and the criminal court, but certainly I heard your last program was talking about men's addictions to sexual behavior and stuff, and we used to deal a lot of my circuit with incest offenders and people like that, and working with the whole family and taking the family apart and making sure everybody got the counselling and then putting back together again, and that was sort of frowned on by many other judges in the area.
Do you think the system's evolved since then in a good way?
Yeah, I think it has. I think the difficulty for sitting judges, there are a lot of wonderful people sitting as judges, and they have to sort of fit into the system, and the individuality that you can have when you're outside the system gets somewhat lost, you know. And I think that...
was it frustrating?
Yeah.
People ask me all the time, what's it like to be a judge? And I think what they're getting at is, what's it like to be able to make court orders that impact on people's lives in such a fundamental way? What is it like? What was it like for you?
It's stressful, isn't it? I mean, particularly in the family court. If you're in the criminal court, you've got lots of leeway. Somebody's either very easily guilty or they're not guilty, and if you're not sure...
And there's reasonable doubt.
Yeah, and if you're not sure, there's reasonable doubt how it goes. But in family matter, you might be taking a child away from somebody, either to social services or giving it to one parent or the other, and you're just on a little tippy top sort of situation.
And you found it stressful?
I think you get used to the stress, but I think there's underlying stress going on for judges the whole time, and I think they need more time out and more time to be able to collect themselves and regenerate themselves and so on and so forth.
Well, you know what gets me is that people expect us to make the right decision and often don't realize that we depend on the parties before us to bring us the evidence, the best possible evidence, so that we can make the most informed decision about what's best for this family. And we don't often get the most complete and the best evidence.
No, and you said that, and that's one of the things I found. I stepped out very much to go into an alternative dispute resolution practice and do a lot of mediation and stuff. And I find in mediation, well, once I got into mediation, I found most of the decisions I was making in the courtroom, I had about 15% of the real information. In mediation, I get it all. But in court, you get about 15%. It's all sort of filtered as it comes to you. You're pushed for time. There's 100 people behind these people coming into court, and so on and so forth.
What's the biggest misconception you think people have about judges? Do they really understand what's involved in what we do?
They have high expectations of us, and that perhaps they forget that we're ordinary people.
But shouldn't they have high expectations? I mean, I often say to people, I'm not allowed to have an error rate. We should have a 0 error rate in the decisions we make because of the impact on the families. So personally, I'm okay with them having high expectations.
Yeah, I think it's okay to have high expectations, but they have to recognize we're human beings too. We get up in the morning, we have family issues at home, something's happened between us and our wife. I used to tell my wife, don't get me upset before I go to court, because it's going to happen to everybody else, you know. So,
well, maybe every judge should be single.
Yeah, well, maybe. But we are human beings, and we have to sort of fit into a bit of a norm. We're rather like, I always remember the saying that we're a bit like swans gliding on the water, and we look so serene up there, but underneath sometimes we're paddling like crazy, and the public don't see that, you know. So,
although I think some people, and me included, do show the stress on the bench. I don't try to hide the disappointment I feel and the frustration I feel when parents are putting their own needs ahead of their kids. I show that frustration, and I show them how upset I am. Well, we need to take a break. Please stay with us. When we come back, I'm going to be asking the biggest question that I've wanted to ask him for a long time, which is, why did you quit your job as a judge after 22 years? We'll be right back. Please stay with us. Welcome back to our very rare discussion with a retired judge. Now, Michael, you were a judge 22 years. It's a pretty nice lifestyle. It's secure. Why did you leave?
A lot of my fellow judges said to me, Mike, well, why are you doing this? Life's tough on the street, and you've got it made here. But I always felt that I needed some more challenge, and I wanted to get out of the adversarial system and get into alternative dispute resolution. That was my sort of love that I developed some training in, and I really loved that work, helping people really solve their own problems rather than just imposing a decision from the top, so to speak.
But the implicit in what you're saying is that there was something about the family justice system that you felt was holding you back, constraining you in some way. Can you articulate what that was?
It's very adversarial, the court system. It's always adversarial. There's always the husband and wife, or social services and a parent, or whoever it might be. They're all fighting, and you're sort of refereeing the fight. It's a win-lose mentality. It's a win-lose mentality. It's like your book with that tug-of-war thing on the front there. In mediation, we're able to really work with the couple as a team. One of the pictures I draw for them is a mountain of people, 2 climbers on a mountain tied together by a rope. And instead of pulling that rope apart like on your book, they're helping each other get up the mountain together and trying to get to the win-win place at the top. And so that's the kind of imagery I deal with my clients now, of working as a team to resolve problems rather than just refereeing fights. And that is so much less stressful and so much more rewarding, that when people get to the end and they made their own decisions, they can make much better decisions for themselves if they put them in the right climate. And
well, you know what you're saying. You are saying that family court is not a good place to resolve parental disputes.
Sometimes it's the only place, and I appreciate that the judges try very, very hard to do their best with what they have, but I really think it's a very clumsy tool to be resolving a lot of the things that are going on in families.
What would you, if you could reinvent the family justice system, start from scratch, what would it look like?
Oh, I would fund much more up front in the sort of family mediation programs that are attached to many of the courts across the country. They do some good work there, but they're so strapped for resources and people and money and stuff to be able to do that work. And much more needs to be done up front than sort of using the valuable court time.
What about counseling? My impression as a judge, and I've only done it 16 years, is that many of the high conflict couples that we see before us are in terrible pain. They have not let go of all of this emotional baggage, the sense of betrayal, the anger against the ex.
Yeah.
They can't seem to move on emotionally, and it's really blocking them from resolving their issues and focusing on their children and on their futures. I think they need counseling.
Yeah, there's a really good program across the country. It was started by Dr. Bruce Fisher in the United States called Rebuilding, and I send a lot of my clients there because very often when one person's going to leave a relationship, they've decided a long time before and they're emotionally ready. The other side sometimes goes through the gate of separation, but emotionally they never get there. So,
they're stunned.
Yeah, they're stunned.
A bomb was dropped on them.
Yeah.
And let's face it, people hurt each other. Very few people who break up are able to do it in a way where they both kind of feel that neither one of them is really the victim. Everybody I ever meet self-identifies as the victim in the relationship.
And then when they get into mediation and we can work on that as a team, then that works so much better. Because in mediation, we're not dealing with what they want or what they say happened or so on. We're dealing with sort of what's going on behind the scenes here, what's really happening to them, and what do they really need to get this resolved.
Well, do they need lawyers? The court I work in has a 72% unrepresented litigants. 72% of them,
Wow.
many of whom can afford at least a consultation with a lawyer. What do you have to say to the legal profession, the family law bar?
Well, the family law bar is, I mean, they're in business. They've got to make a go of it. And of course, they can't give all of their time away. There are a lot of very good pro bono organizations in the legal profession across the country now. But people do need lawyers.
But have they outpriced themselves?
Yeah, it's got beyond, absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of people who just simply can't afford it. The middle class can't afford to go and have a big fight in a courtroom. But they can come to a mediation process, which is a fraction of the cost. And I'm not saying it's a panacea for everybody, but more often than not, it's going to work for people because they get into a completely different mindset.
But even after mediation, before they sign that agreement, they have to get legal advice.
They still have to go on a lawyer. And so there are a lot of lawyers trained now in mediation, in the collaborative law programs across the country, and they are able to pick up a mediation report and say, okay, I see how this came about, and then go through it with the client and sign off on it fairly economically.
But I feel, just from where I sit, that the legal profession, particularly family law lawyers, has a bad reputation. It's unbelievable the negative comments, the negative perception people have about lawyers. Was that the case when you were a judge?
Yes, I think it was. It's always been the case.
Well, why?
Well, because one lawyer can do a lot of damage.
Are there a lot of lawyers out there doing damage?
Well, there might be 9 very good lawyers and there might be 1 bad lawyer, but the 1 bad lawyer is going to get the press.
But it seems to me that there's a great reluctance on the part of many people, even if they can afford a lawyer, not to get one. And I'm wondering if some of this has to do with the Judge Judy phenomenon. What do you think of this former judge who's on TV for entertainment purposes, but for a lot of people, that's what they think the court system is like. You go there, you tell your story, she'll give you a decision and there'll be a commercial.
Well, to that extent, it's harmful, isn't it? Because you know and I know that the real courtroom is nothing like what you see on Judge Judy. And it's
well, we know it.
It's good entertainment, but the public, as you say, think that's what it's going to be like, and of course it's not like that at all.
Well, one of the reasons we do this show is that the public can see a real judge today too, and find out what it's really like, because I think that the public has, many people in the public really have created an impression for themselves of the justice system from watching shows like that.
And that's why they should read your book, Tug of War. I mean, that is such a great book to the general public. I give it to all of my clients. I know there are lawyers that I deal with who give it to all of their clients to sort of bring back the reality of actually what's happening in the court prison, what they can do and what they can't do. There are so many great lines in that. I quoted one just the other day, in fact, to these two that were wonderful parents, but they were just ripping each other apart. And I said, you know, you should read Judge Harvey Brownstone's book, where he says you have to love your children more than you hate your ex-partner.
I think it's all about that. I really do. I think if you can put aside the anger you feel towards your ex, just put that aside and love your kids enough to deal with somebody that you actually hate, your children will benefit. Well, we're going to take another break. When we come back, we are going to be discussing what Judge Porter is doing now and why he feels that it's so much more effective than adjudicating in a courtroom. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Family Matters and our remaining moments with retired Judge Michael Porter. You know, you strike me as a calm person. You're very compassionate. There's a lot of warmth. What qualities do you think make for a good judge?
Well, obviously, a judge has to have a good basis in law, but I think the real good qualities a good judge needs, particularly in the family court, are probably patience and empathy.
Empathy.
Yeah, the ability to be able to understand what these people are going through. Yeah,
even though many of us never have. You know, I remember when I first got the job, I was fortunate enough to have two parents who were very happy with each other in a loving home. I was never exposed to substance abuse or domestic violence or sexual abuse. And I got this job, and for the first 6 months, I think I was numb. I'd never been exposed to this kind of dysfunctionality. It was quite an adjustment.
A lot of
I couldn't empathize with people that seemed unable to put their kids first or be neglectful or abusive. Did you find that?
Well, yes and no. I mean, they're in so much pain and they're lashing out, you know. They're suffering. Usually when they're angry, it's because there's something, there's fear going on for them underneath. They're frightened of losing their children or losing their ability to earn their living or whatever it might be. There's a lot of fear in there. And I think as judges come to understand that, they can do a real good job with these people in the courtroom.
One of my frustrations that I'm very public about is that my training was in the law. I'm not a social worker or a psychologist or a counselor or a therapist, and yet most of the problems we see in family court, if you put aside the money and the property issues, most of the problems are not legal problems.
No.
You know, when two people can't agree on how to schedule a child's time, there's really no statute that's going to give me a specific answer to that.
No.
Did you find that frustrating as well?
Yeah, I did find it frustrating because until I started doing this dispute resolution training that I took on for about 5 years, and I did an immense amount of training before I left the bench in a different field. But as I learned about communication and how they're communicating and how I could get them to communicate in a better way, because once they start communicating in an effective way, then they can do so much more themselves.
So parents need really to learn how to communicate with someone they're having difficulty with, and they don't really learn that in a courtroom. And we judges aren't trained. You took all this training on your own.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you think judges who do family law need a different kind of training than just what we get as lawyers?
I think many of them are getting it now. They're starting doing judicial dispute resolution and stuff, and they're getting training before they do that. And
do you give some of that training?
I don't do any of the training for the judges.
But you do teach collaborative law.
I taught collaborative law for quite a few years when we first brought it up into Canada, yeah.
And I guess as a mediator, and we should just get it now before I forget, your website. Mediate with Mike.
Yeah, that's my mediate with Mike at shaw.ca. That's how
at shaw.ca. Yeah. Mediate with Mike at shaw.ca.
Thank you. Yes.
I actually know it better than you.
Yes, you do. Because I don't email myself. So.
Does being a former judge assist you in your credibility with clients in the community?
People come to me because I've been a judge, but those aren't the skills I actually bring to the table to help them. They come to me because of that, but then I use a completely different set of skills to help them.
And from what I hear, and you are a renowned mediator, you've had some amazing, I was going to say war stories, but they're peace stories.
I'll tell you one little story very quickly. There was a couple that came in to me. He had, it was a second marriage for both of them. They'd been together for some time. They had a farm. He had a farm, and he had an affair with another woman, and she was madder than heck at him, and she could hardly bring herself to talk to him when they came into the room. We worked out all the things that we needed to work out in mediation, and we had, I think, 2 sessions, and at the end of the second session, when it was all resolved, I said, so what do you want to do? Do you want to shake hands or what? And he said, I'll do more than that. I'll give you a hug. And she said, will you? And they stood up and they hugged. And I didn't know which way to look. I mean, it was early on in my career. I see lots of hugs now, but that was quite a shock to me.
I've never seen that in the courtroom.
No, I'd never seen it in the courtroom. And 6 weeks later, she phoned me up and she said, you know what? And I thought maybe it's going to come unraveled. She said, he's decided to leave the farm by his will to my son. And I thought, wasn't that great? Because these people found peace with each other in doing the mediation and resolving things together.
When I tell people that it's possible, if they only believe and open themselves up to some help, they can actually be civilized and businesslike with somebody they absolutely hate. They seem to they can't believe it.
You have to take the fear out of it. They have to do the understanding work. They have to be able to work as a team together as problem resolvers rather than adversaries. And that's the difference between mediation and the court system.
Maybe lawyers need special training as well.
Yeah, I think more and more, particularly family lawyers, really do need that. Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's the answer, because people do go to lawyers. Well, in our remaining moments, any key messages, anything you want to say to the public that I haven't asked you?
I had a woman once come in and say, Your Honor, if you'd just order him to love me, everything would be okay. And that was when I was in court. And I had to try and disabuse her of that I couldn't order him to love her, and that wasn't going to work.
That's very sad.
People do have a misconception of what the court's all about.
They need to know what we can and we cannot do, and I hope today's program has given people a bird's eye view, a rather unique opportunity to hear 2 judges talk about how the system works. It was a great pleasure to have you on this show. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm very, very supportive of the work you're doing, Harvey.
Well, I'm very, very grateful for that support. From everyone here at Family Matters, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time.